Welcome to our 56th podcast. Today we'll be talking about when to push, when to pause, timing and change management. What's the one thing you can do now to know when to hold them and when to fold them? Keep listening to find out. Welcome to Harmonious Workplaces, a podcast about corporate culture, organizational change management, and workplace behavior. Harmonious Workplaces was started by independent consultants Rich Cruz, Ben Kleinman, and Cheryl Volpe to explore, challenge, and build on various organizational culture and change management concepts. It's a blend of theory and practice based on their personal and professional experiences working with companies of all sizes across various industries. If you own a business, lead a team, want new ideas about the corporate environment, or just want to listen to a group of consultants talking about how to make work more enjoyable, we invite you to sit back, relax, and dive in with us to Harmonious Workplaces. Hello, Harmonious Workplaces listeners. Welcome back. We are going to be talking about change today. My name is Rich Cruz. I am an organizational development consultant, and I am pleased to be back again with our co-host, Ben Kleinman. Hey, Ben.
Hey, everyone.
And Cheryl Volpe.
Hi, everyone.
And we are going to be talking about, well, we always talk about change, but today it's really about like when changes, like when we should be pushing forward with change. And then when we should realize that there's probably a good time for us to take a break here. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this came up because in some of our conversations, we were realizing that there's this idea of change fatigue that we've talked about, and that people naturally just need pauses and breaks, and there's a bit of a cadence. And so I thought it might be interesting to explore, how do we know when that cadence should be, what that cadence should be, how that cadence should be felt and manifested throughout the change initiative and things like that.
Yeah.
I think there's plenty of literature out there that says you can't just full on barrel through a change and expect it to go swimmingly well. And so what are some ways that we can anticipate the ups and downs? What are some ways that maybe we can be more proactive or intentional about the sort of seasons of change or the sequence of change, if you will?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think maybe we start with kind of defining, for people who haven't experienced this, which is probably very few, but change fatigue, right? Which
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
did a little bit of research with Gemini's deep research module here, and so the definition that I have here is that's when employees feel overwhelmed and apathetic towards ongoing organizational changes, leading to exhaustion and the reduced ability to adapt. Does that sound like a reasonable?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think where I've seen it manifest itself is just you start to see a reduced level of engagement. So decreased engagement, people sort of show up at meetings, but they're a little bit more of a shell or a ghost than they are in the initial phases of that early excitement or early wondering what is going on. I've seen it where people have just a shorter fuse. They're a little bit less tolerant of new ideas or less tolerant of hearing more about this change. They just kind of want to pretend it's not there anymore or anything like that. I think you've seen it where you have, like you were saying, that frustration, that resistance, but it seems like leadership has kind of also faded away sometimes, and they're not out there consistently beating the drum, walking the walk, championing the change in a way that's meaningful. I think after
Right.
a while, the sort of quarterly update cheerleading message doesn't, it's helpful, it's necessary, but it doesn't always quite meet the need. So those are some of the more tactical ways I've seen that. But yeah, it's consistent with what you're saying. How about you guys? Where have you seen that?
The most effective way to keep everyone on the same page is to make sure that management is telling the same narrative. And I've seen that many times when it's management, they don't all have the same walk to match the talk. And then when that starts to happen, that inherent resistance just flourishes.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And now I've seen it where not only do you have people who may show up to the meetings or whatever, but there are people who will outright avoid going to a meeting. I didn't know that. I didn't hear that. They kind of turn off the communication channel, just, put because they need to put it on pause. And I think today we have a little bit, there may be a little more tolerance about some of that checking out process because, we have at least some awareness of mental health, in the workplace. So, these times where people, they take a mental health day, right? And some employers are embracing that type of thing. Um,
Do you think there's also maybe a little bit of a buffer because so many people are engaging remotely now over Zoom or other platforms where it's a little easier to have a buffer or a little bit of distance. So when I'm in person in a meeting, it's really hard to pretend if I'm not engaged. But when I'm on a screen, I can kind of manage that a little better, or maybe you can kind of go off camera for a moment, or you can go get a water without people really worrying about that as much. I mean, do you think that over the last couple of years, as everything has become remote, that's sort of masked a little bit of that change fatigue, or maybe in a different way made it easier for people to manage their own fatigue in a way?
well, in my experience, anecdotally, right? Um, when you go to a meeting, look at how many people are off camera or have to be told to come on camera, right? And
Yeah.
and that's kind of a sign of where we're at, in the process, right? And oftentimes you have to ask the person, "Can you turn on your camera?" And you might even get, "Oh, I'm having problems with this, that, the other thing," and it could be very well true,
Yeah,
but
there's always gonna be that kinda thing.
yeah,
But
yeah,
that's a good point.
but yeah, you can certainly hide the, no longer do you need the fake glasses that have the eyeballs and
That's our
right.
next that's it. We've got the evil mustaches, now we need the I'm always awake glasses.
I'm always awake classes, that's
I
right,
love
yeah.
it.
But to never blink is a sign of real aggression. So you do have to be careful with it. Maybe if they blink, it
I
might
was
work.
gonna say, we might have technology
I
nowadays
bet there's
where those
AI
glasses will
glasses.
blink now.
Yeah. I
Sure,
haven't looked
sure,
into those, the Meta Ray-Bans, but I bet they could simulate a blink.
sure,
Right,
sure. I've got a story
right,
about a robot puppet that couldn't blink for 20 years, and then all of a sudden it could. It was a big deal.
and that it could.
So I would like to comment on what you're saying, both of you, and in those remote meetings, in my experience, in what I've sensed, and I'm sure there are many academics who have written about this. I just haven't researched this myself yet. But there's a whole nother language that's going on in the remote meetings, right? Being off camera. Is it really
Mhm.
okay to turn your camera off? Can you really step away? And what does that say to the rest of the room? Sometimes it's okay. Repeat offenders, it's not okay. If you have a reputation for being always engaged, hyper engaged, and
Mhm.
really focused and a doer, then, if you step away for a minute, I think it's fine. But there are some
Sure.
people who do it a lot, or you just expect their camera to be off, right? And there's
Mhm,
these hidden messages that are exchanged in a whole different
right.
language than it is when you're sitting next to each other in a room, right?
So it's a
That's
little bit of
true.
that signaling, Cheryl, that you've
Yeah,
talked a lot about.
Right,
exactly.
And
right.
then is it up to the the managers or the leaders or your change agents to call that out? And by call it out, I don't mean sort of screen shame people, but maybe check in with people that say, "Hey, usually you're pretty engaged in these meetings. Usually you're on camera. I noticed you were off or very silent. Or is everything okay?" Or maybe it is that sort of like, "Hey, this is the meeting where everyone is on camera. Unless you are actively vomiting for some reason because you're homesick, you will be on camera," right? And so it's that kind of thing.
Right. It's a great point. And the idea that you even have to mention that everyone has to be on camera or not means that that is a huge signaling element, behavior, action, right? That
Sure.
you even have to mention this idea that people need to see your face. Well, why is that? Well, because we're not in person. Your expressions might be saying something we need to know if you're not
Hmm.
speaking up, et cetera, et
Hmm.
cetera. And also, back to your original question about is it up to the managers or the leaders? They have to be attuned to what is happening in the room. And it's their responsibility to notice that if this person's behavior is affecting morale, or if it is contagious to other people who feel like they don't need to be on point just because it's remote, that's important. They'll have to take these people aside if they are even noticing. Another thing leaders and managers can do is be on time and have
Mm,
their camera on. It's a lot of modeling, which is
right.
related to the
Right.
signaling. It sets the
Yeah.
tone.
And it ties to the walking the walk.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, let's do this real quick. 'Cause I'd love to dive into that a little bit more, that kind of walking the walk. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk a little bit more about that. Okay?
Great.
We'll be right back.
Meet Hermie the HR Hermit Crab. Laugh, learn, and lead better with Hermie. Hermie is here to tackle workplace madness with heart and humor from Harmonious Workplaces. He's perfect for HR pros, leaders, and change makers. Hermie teaches workplace lessons through cartoons and is great for team discussions and workshops. Get your copy on Amazon now. www.hermiehrhermitcrab.com. Again, that's hermiehrhermitcrab.com.
And we are back. So we were talking about change fatigue, and we're talking about the leader role in overcoming some of this, right? And
Recognizing it and also being aware of signaling, I think was Cheryl's point in terms
yeah,
of modeling good behavior, cultural norms, best practices, and walking the walk, I think is where we left off in terms of leaders, change agents, change managers need to really reinforce the good behavior by consistently walking the walk and exhibiting that desired behavior. And I think you had some
absolutely.
thoughts that you wanted to share.
Yeah. Well, first of all, if you want to learn more about signaling in the workplace, you can go to our website at harmoniousworkplaces.com/signaling, and you can get the free white paper that Cheryl put together, which is just jam packed with information
Yeah,
for
no,
you
take
on that.
advantage of it. It's a great resource, and
Absolutely.
go to
Yes.
Cheryl. She's our go-to for signaling,
Yes. I
for
put a lot
psychological safety,
I put a
for
lot
meeting people where they are.
intentional.
Intentionally.
Right. I'm reminded of I'm reminded of the leadership challenge, the Kuzen Posner thing that's been around since 1987 or so, where there's these 5 principles of leadership. And one of those is to model the way, right? And we've also seen this in other leadership models, right? And so there's leadership and there's management, where it's kind of interesting because we're talking about that difference in class this week at Trinity. Um, so management is more of the alignment of resources and the uh, keeping things on track, right? Where leadership is really making sure that what gets done, and that it is aligned to the vision of what the organization is doing, right? Whether that's a project or the overall operation. Is that fair to say? Is there any other
I think
definition of
it,
leadership on that?
maybe in the simplest sense, leaders are setting the vision, setting the goal, and management traditionally is executing
Right,
that goal, making sure that the organization is getting to that goal.
It's fair.
right.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's oversimplified, but
Yeah,
for
right,
for
right,
for
right.
right now, for this discussion, maybe that's helpful.
Yep. And Cheryl, you've talked before about transformational leadership, up there versus transactional leadership. That's, transactional being more passive and uh, less focused on the person, right? Where transformational is on that top end of being wholly engaged with the people and being very active. And at the top of that full, I think it's a full range leadership model. The top of that is being a role model, right? Modeling the way. So
Well, I would like to say transformational as an aspirational level can also not be engaged with the individual. It can be so vision infused that a
mhm,
manager or a leader that has that style is going to make those changes and stay on that path no matter what. And the
no matter
hope
what.
is that the inspiration, the motivation, the cheerleading, the walking the walk, you know, looking behind them less and just really forging ahead with that vision, which makes it at the opposite end of strictly transactional laissez-faire,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
you're not wrong about what you said, but it can be unattached to the employees to the point where it can kind of backfire. It takes a very specific type of traits and personality and hubris, charisma, all of those things. Uh,
Sure.
but going back to your point that there are different styles of management that can determine the path of the change or if it is successful or not,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And
Yep.
so getting back to that modeling is very important.
Yeah. The the modeling the behaviors that we're expecting everybody else to
Yep.
model. Is that right?
To make
Yeah.
it successful, right? Which is
Yeah.
consistent
Right.
message, explaining the why, what is the intention, how it will affect you personally, what you have to do to make the change happen, what is your motivation,
Yep.
what is the reward, all of those things.
Sure. But leaders, they can get burnt out too, no?
Oh,
So
very much so.
Right. Right.
what
And I
happens
think
when we're
that's
in
where I
that
was kind of
situation?
curious how we tie that into this notion of there's going to be change fatigue. That not everyone is going to consistently push the same message or model the behavior that you want, whether they're leaders or managers or line employees. There's going to be these ebbs and flows, and there's going to be periods of engagement and periods of disengagement. Are there
Mhm.
ways that we can kind of plan for that or proactively anticipate that and then get ahead of that so that when we see those happening, when we see those coming, when we think, "Oh, we just had a really big all staff meeting. We announced this big thing. There's a lot of excitement." Maybe a month later, we need to realize that there might be a little bit of a different feel throughout the organization, or 3 months later, there might be a different feel. How do we get ahead of that so that we keep people engaged and not necessarily at that same pitch, at that same level of super jazz, super excited, but how do we keep them engaged in meaningfully moving the organization along to where it needs to be?
Sure.
And some of that, like you're both talking about, is modeling, but how do we help the modelers stay in modeling mode? How do we help the employees stay in engagement mode?
Sure. And there are a series of things that can be done to address those kinds of problems. Number one, and as we have been saying, is open communication, pulse
Mhm.
surveys, check-ins. How are things going? Reiteration of the objectives. When you start seeing milestones slipping or objectives not being met, or a product that's not exactly working, or a product that isn't what it was supposed to be, these are all warning signs that the communication's not clear enough. Some companies even establish a change help desk, right? This is a huge uh, symbol that leadership really cares about the people that need to go through these changes,
Mhm.
right?
Hmm.
I think the agile model, although I've never worked with it personally, I think it was designed to sort of address some of these potential lagging behind resistance and failures at different points. I don't know if either of you have ever actually worked with it, but I think that was something that was designed to have a lot of check-in points to keep a project moving quickly at a pace
Well, there.
that was required, and especially when there were a lot of changes required, trying to avoid
Well, it's
change fatigue, right? So
Mm.
right, right. There's certain. It's certainly set up where you're supposed to have like a daily huddle, which is like a 15-minute check-in every day that I'm aware of, right? When I've worked with BAs who are more trained in agile,
yeah,
and then it's a 2-week sprint, right?
Business
So
analysts for the rest of it.
yeah, yeah, business analyst, thanks. But it tends to be a 2-week sprint, so you're coming up. So it's a very focused effort within these 2 weeks to come up with a minimally viable product and MVP. Um, and so there's some degree of understanding that, there's this end goal. There's also uh, baked into this some of the need to acknowledge the accomplishments and to celebrate the wins, which is another leadership aspect that I think helps to move things forward and keep people engaged, if that makes sense.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion around how agile methodology can apply or could apply to the change management world. Typically, in my experience, I've seen agile used more with product development or software development, where you're on a very um, regular cadence, often a week, 2 weeks, something like that, and you're
Right.
meant over that 2 week cycle to complete a handful of things, make sure they're done correctly, and you build these cycles together in sort of a slightly
Us,
longer cadence
yeah.
so that at the end of, let's say, a 6 week or 8 week period, you've got something that's maybe more macro usable. And then you just
Mhm.
repeat that for a while, but it's meant to be a very short cycles of, is this right? Is this wrong? Are we getting close? Yes, no, that sort of immediate feedback loop. As far as change management goes, it seems like there are some of those principles that people think can apply, and others that it seems like it's harder to translate into getting human beings to behave differently.
y-
And conceptually, it's just harder, right,
Yeah.
to get
Right.
a
Yeah.
person to do something than it is a piece of software.
Yeah. And
Yep.
it's had some wins and losses, Agile has, right? It's sort of had its favorable period and then sort of, detractors. But the fact that a leader or a company even institutes that kind of thing speaks to its culture. It sets the expectation that you're entering into an environment that's going to have a rapid pace because it is how our raison d'etre has to happen on this kind of cycle, whatever it is that, and it doesn't work for all companies, I think might be part of your point too.
Right.
Yeah. But
Well, it's sorry, go ahead.
well, there's also ProSci, for example, uses the ADKAR model. That's a whole different model that they bring into a company and they show a company how to apply the uh, awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement to affect change. And that is sort of a broader, more general application to any company. It's kind of an agnostic kind of model that anyone could bring into their company to make change more successful and easier. So
Mhm.
it's another part of a different kind of culture that
Hmm.
Yep.
has
Hmm.
change.
Yep. Yep. And the research supports that, like using some kind of a framework, and most of those frameworks has some kind of like, so ACAR has this kind of reinforcement model and or component to it. Cotter has celebrating the wins. That's an 8-step model. Um, these models have this kind of point where you have to stop, take a break, and assess. Does that make sense? That's how I
Hmm.
interpret them anyway,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, because I think if you're intentional about, we've talked about, and well, now it's March, or now it's April, but we talked about in March, uh, play and intentionality and fun and those types of things. I think being intentional and taking some of those breaks preemptively can be.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's the missing link that I was looking for, is this idea that regardless of the model, you have to figure out what's right for your change initiative, for your organization, for your culture, and then proactively build in those breaks. And
Mm.
whether it's the sort of semi-forced agile break every 2 weeks or so on a traditional cadence, or whether it's a little bit more abstract, celebrate a win, Cotter methodology, whatever that win means, or it's something around the reinforcement in the ADKAR model, taking that more abstract approach, but making it much more concrete and thinking about when you can have your early radar up to recognize what are some of those early warning signs, so that if one person is showing up at a meeting a little bit disengaged, you use that as an opportunity to suss out whether it's just that one person having a bad day, or if that's the canary in the coal mine for everyone in that department is about ready to walk, and you're gonna, have some pretty big problems coming up.
Well, first of all, I have to say thank you, Cheryl, for bringing in a wonderful French phrase. You're right.
At
And
that.
second of all, and second of all, Ben, when you say canary in a coal mine, for whatever reason, the police comes into my head, and that's if anybody's ever heard that song, "Canary in a Coal Mine," that's this for whatever reason, but the whole night, everything in the '90s just came in flooding into me just now.
I
Well,
have to
So
apologize for that. That's
well, you were having your
we'll leave it there.
reverie. Oh, I was impressed that Ben had done such a lovely summary. You really
Oh,
were
it
engaged,
was great.
Ben. You listened to everything Rich said, and then you synthesized it very good. Thank you.
since
Lovely, lovely
since we're
work.
going there, thank you. Since we're going there, I'm curious if you've ever been on a change initiative or org transformation, or maybe in your world, some sort of org design or org development initiative, and you've thought about whether there's a theme song that would be really applicable. And maybe we'll leave that as the cliffhanger and come back after a break and talk about that.
I love it. Okay. We'll be right back. At Harmonious Workplaces, we believe work should provide purpose, satisfaction, and growth. We empower people to thrive by fostering environments where individuals can find meaning in their work and organizations can succeed through thoughtful, well-executed strategies. We're committed to making work better for the people who do it and the leaders who guide them. To discover how Harmonious Workplaces can impact your organization, visit www.harmoniousworkplaces.com and book a free 30-minute information session with one of our consultants today. Again, that's www.harmoniousworkplaces.com. And we're back. So we've been talking about change fatigue, when to push forward, when to hold back, when to take breaks and all that stuff. And then Ben, why don't you reiterate that question you just
Yeah,
had?
so I'm super curious if folks have had a theme song, whether explicitly or just implicitly running in the soundtrack in their mind on a given change project or an organizational design initiative or an organizational development project, whatever it might be. And I'm asking because, at the top of the episode, Rich, you were referencing when hold 'em, when to fold 'em. So people might recognize that. You just mentioned canary in a coal mine. Classic example is any political campaign that has a theme song. And sometimes that goes well, and sometimes that's just a bit of a oopsie on that part. And I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking about it because sometimes I'm on a project and I think a little bit more in terms of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers and that sort of
Oh,
1940s graceful waltz type of thing where there's that musicality of elegance, if you will. And then other
Mm-hmm.
times I'm on a project where I think Black Sabbath and just that real heavy metal edge with heavy guitars and heavy bass and heavy drums and a little bit of that sort of staticky sound just driving, really grinding and driving. And it occurred to me that whether you use that in a way that's out loud or it's just a little people in your head that are talking to you, that sometimes change has a theme or a song that meets that change. I'm curious if that's just me being a little bit crazy or if that is stuff that you guys think about too.
wow.
Cheryl, what do you think? I have all kinds of thoughts on
I
this.
want to work with Ben on I want to be Fred Astaire and
Right?
Ginger Rogers
Right?
lighting their shit. Or,
Wouldn't that be cool?
really crunching the Black Sabbath. I can only hear one song in my head ever since you mentioned it, and it has to be this is an easy no-brainer for me. It was always in our minds. It never went away for 8 solid years. I could only hear the theme song for Mystery Science Theater. Do do
Oh
do
my
do
gosh.
do 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 in every iteration, right? So, it's not really fair for me to answer. It's your turn, Rich.
I think it's totally fair for
Well,
you to answer that way.
yeah. Wow. That kept you going, huh?
Well, because there were so many different versions, and one of the most amazing iterations was when the show came back, and there was
Mhm.
an orchestral revision of it, and it was
Was it really?
really, really something, yeah. So, it is look upable, so
That's right. Okay. Well, for me, Eye of the Tiger by Survivor
Oh,
is almost any of the, I've got this running playlist, right? And it's full of the Rocky stuff and the Karate Kid. You're the best around. Um, and when I've been in certain projects and the energy is low, and I can read the room that I'm not gonna like, put somebody over the edge, right? Because those are pretty those are pretty intense, right? But
Yeah.
sometimes putting that on, especially when you're in a room of people who actually know what those songs are, right? They can be a rallying cry,
oh, you'll play them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
For instance, this is not work, but it was a volunteer thing, right? But working with um, the high school band program, right? Loading and unloading trucks at like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, to get from downstate up, right? You put on that music that people of a similar age recognize, and we're like, "Oh, I remember that song." We're just all
Yeah.
moving together. So there is some power in motivational music that can put things back on track. There's also quite a bit of after a few songs you can get pretty fatigued. It's just like a workout. Like oh,
There's a
That's
limit.
fun.
enough already.
That's great.
That's funny. Although I do have to say that Ben introduced me to an Indian band called Bloodywood, which is so intense. And I ran with this and I had my best time in a month um, on the trail.
So
So
Bloodywood is basically heavy metal meets Indian Bhangra music, and so it's Bollywood meets heavy metal. It is
Oh,
super intense, shredding guitars, all the heavy metal you could think of with a Indian Bollywood feel.
Yeah. Yeah. And then they did a collaboration with uh Baby Metal from Japan, female group from heavy metal group from Japan. And that's how I opened. And it's just magic.
Wow.
Can't wait.
Oh yeah. It's fantastic. But I mean, maybe that's what we need to add into the workplace is
Push
finding that bal-
or Bloodywood. I'm sorry.
bloody wood.
Here's change on speed.
Right.
Well,
But there is, I mean, look, historically we've had anthems, right?
You're
That
right.
have
Anthem.
brought
They
people together,
unify us. They get us all on
well,
the same
sure. There's
page.
the
They
national
motivate.
anthem, and there's every sports team worth its salt has a theme song or an anthem of sorts, and so
Right. Right.
it's part and parcel with that. The
Sure.
military has always had marching music and anthems and whatnot.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just part of me is thinking a little bit about a prior guest we had, Robert Snyder, and some of his elegance,
Mm,
and thinking about how we're just talking about change cadence and waves and ebbs and flows when you're on the beach, and it's not just one wave all the time. It's a wave comes in, wave comes out, and this notion of pushing and
mm,
pulling, and how do you sequence that? At what cadence are you sequencing that? Is it a very fast, heavy metal type of sequence or a slightly more gradual, gentler sequence? And maybe there's a
sure.
sequencing to maybe the art is when to know when do you put on the gentle 1940s music and when do you put on the Stravinsky, right? Orchestral music, and when do you put on the Bloodywood or the Ozzy
That's
Osbourne?
good.
And
Right
the
on.
wisdom to
Yeah.
know the difference. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and wrapping up this
On
episode,
that note,
uh, on that note,
Ah,
I see where you went there.
saw what you did.
Um, what what's a tip that we can leave here? You know, we say the one thing, but it's hard to say the one thing in this case. But
I can't.
what would be your takeaway on this?
We haven't mentioned it yet. Can't believe it. And it's the first thing that popped into my mind. In order to keep communication open about the change and to keep things
Mhm.
on track, be aware when they're not on track, intervene when they're not on track, and fix when they're. What does it take? It takes P safety. I'm just going to start using it. I'm going to make.
There you go.
I'm going to make
P
an
safety.
acronym. I've just made a new acronym. It's P safety.
Psychological safety. I love it. Yeah. Okay.
And I get away from it.
You can't. And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, just being sensitive and aware of what's going on and allowing people to be people,
And talk about it
you know.
openly and not just again at the water cooler where people start to feel disenfranchised and then that toxic seed gets planted and then you have
Yeah.
bigger problems, right?
Sure. Sure. Ben, anything to add to that?
I think it's all just stuff we've talked about in this podcast in terms of being aware and intentional, planning ahead, knowing that you're going to face naturally just times of change fatigue, change exhaustion, and how are you planning to deal with that and not pretending it's never going to be there. And then having your 8-track ready with either Ozzy Osbourne or Stravinsky.
8-track.
Canary in a coal mine, I don't think should stay on there though. I don't. I think
That's probably
I
not.
think that's self-defeating
Oh,
there.
I like that song.
If you're working alone, anyway.
Yeah, I get that. It may not be the rallying cry that
I
we
think that
need.
needs to be our outro music
I'm still
on today's
alive.
episode. I Will Survive, the Larry Gaynor.
Yeah. That should be the canary song.
And Rich, what about you?
Keep the music going You know, I mean, I love the idea of having, uh, if it's not our own soundtrack, you know, it played in our mind, you know, but aligning people to some, you know, I think that that is kind of a central focus that we can all have that can keep us, you know, aligned to something, you know. So even just saying the words, okay, everybody, eye of the tiger, right? It just kind of elicits the, we've got to focus and get this done. Um, or conversely, right, we need to take a break. And I don't know what song would be that we have to, that we would use to do that. Um, I don't know. You bring in music and that's where my
Well,
mind
I
goes.
I know we're wrapping up, but the drum circles have at their
I was just
core.
gonna say,
Yeah. I
for
mean,
those of you who are open to a powerful experience that isn't your everyday run of the mill change or employee building, morale building experience, Rich is a master of drum circles, and that could be a really nice opportunity for your organizations to do something that's just a little bit different, but really powerful.
Yeah, those, I mean, yeah, in a drum circle, we go through a lot of adaptive change, and the lessons that come out of that can certainly be applied far beyond, you
Mhm.
know, and it does make sure that we're all, you know, beating to the same drum, or, you know, rowing in the same direction, or whatever analogy you want to make to that. But yeah, they can be very powerful. They're used for quite a few different organizations. So
Mhm.
um yeah,
That's great.
yeah. If you if you want to learn more, go to harmoniousworkplaces.com/drum circles.
That is two amazing resources we've given people
That's
today.
right. Yes.
If nothing else, Cheryl is the expert on signaling and psychological safety. Rich is the expert on drum circles. There you go. You've just solved like 98% of your corporate problems
And
right there.
Ben has a very simple change management framework that is easy to follow. And if you
Easily
go to our
adaptable to
website,
multiple soundtracks.
there
guys, change by number.
oh, that's like paint by number, but change by
Extraordinary.
number.
Oh, I
Love it.
like
Ben's
that.
framework.
That's
We need
it.
a Hermie the Hermit crab paint by number.
Oh,
All
There you
right.
go.
We need to wrap
All
this
right.
up
not a
because
bad
we're
idea. Right on.
all right.
Yes. Okay.
If our theme song changes to Eye of the Tiger, we will get in trouble. So don't do it, Rich, as much as I want you to.
I understand all about the IP on that.
I so want
Cheers
that
to
to be
you.
our theme song now.
I know, right? Yeah.
I can hear it.
Unofficial.
All right. Well, until next time, everyone, make change your friend. Thanks for listening to Harmonious Workplaces. You can find Harmonious Workplaces on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and other streaming platforms. We'd love any feedback on whatever channel you find us on. Please rate, like, and share our podcast with your network, and remember to add Harmonious Workplaces to your list of favorites to get notified about each new episode. To contact Rich or Cheryl, please visit www.workbalanceconsulting.com. To connect with Ben, find him on LinkedIn or visit at www.harborsidestrategy.com.